Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Anatomy of Drawing a Comic Pinup. Today I will be showing you guys how I illustrated this Juggernaut, this Juggernaut versus Deadpool piece. And as you can see, it's a little bit more elaborate than the most of the drawings that I've been doing lately, and it's also a little bit more dynamic. And I've been approaching this by, trying to adapt or trying to use more exaggerated shapes and forms for the characters. And obviously, I'm going to talk about that in the video. If you do have any questions about what I was doing, how I did it, feel free to ask me in the comments. And if you like what you see here, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. You can also follow me on Instagram, which is at Sedat Özgen, should be up here, and on my Facebook, which is at Sedat Özgen Art. And the links to both social media platforms should be below in the description. Thank you guys for tuning in, and see you in the video. Alright, so as you can see, I am starting to sketch out what is going to be Juggernaut's body, and right away after sketching out Juggernaut's physique or figure, I realized that something was missing in the drawing, and I wanted to add another character into the drawing, and I thought it would be interesting to do something else other than Wolverine, who's probably usually the character that you would go for when you're fighting someone, when you're drawing someone fighting Juggernaut. So I thought drawing a character that I haven't drawn in a very, very long time would be interesting. So I decided to go with everyone's favorite mercenary, which is obviously Deadpool. And I am really, right away from the start of the drawing, liking where the pose is going. I have been, struggling a little bit with the arms and with Deadpool's leg, but mostly because in the beginning of the drawing, or the first poses that I came up with, looked a little bit boring, and then I tried to fix the whole thing. And same thing goes for Juggernaut's arms, because I wanted to make it look dynamic and interesting, but still maintain the these crazy shapes that I used for Juggernaut, because there are a few characters that from their physique I consider them to be almost shaped like gorillas, for example Juggernaut or Venom or the Incredible Hulk, because I think the Hulk a little bit less, but with Juggernaut and Venom I could totally see them have like these really strong upper bodies, and then these kind of thin and small legs. And it was a little bit hard to get Juggernaut's figure down correctly, and to get the idea that I had in my mind on paper. But I think that mostly it went down very fast, and here I am using a toy gun as a reference for Deadpool's gun. And it's always better to have a reference when you're drawing a gun or a car or something like that, because that's usually making the whole thing look a little bit more realistic and more believable. And that's what I went for with his weapon. I think if you look at Deadpool's pose, the pose is dynamic, but still he looks like he's still in control. And with Juggernaut it looks like he's trying to stop his momentum that he was in while he was running. I think in the final piece it will become a little bit more clear. And yeah, since I was trying to keep this in a certain time frame, I didn't want to add a um, background or an elaborate background, so I decided that I would go with something easier, but you'll find that later on in the drawing, because right now I'm still at the sketching stage, and I think the sketching took a little bit longer than I did, than I expected, because the paper that I was using was a different paper from the paper that I usually use, and I wanted to ink the whole thing, or certain areas with some brushes, but I could tell right away that these brushes weren't perfect for the paper, and I tried to figure out a way in to make it work, but at some point I think I am putting the brush down and going with pens, but at this moment I am still trying to find a solution with the brushes. I'm doing a little bit of feathering and certain areas of the body with the brush, but the results that I was getting with the brush here on this paper and with this drawing didn't you know work the way that I wanted it to work. So I decided to go with my fine liners, and yeah, and this is where I am switching to those fine liners, because the paper felt like it was more um, you know it was better for using pens on the paper, but it was kind of weird because the paper, although it is kind of smooth, it still has this little bit of tooth to it that I am not used to, and you know the, there's a certain degree of tooth or vellumness. I'm not sure what the right term here is. That kind of feels odd on this paper, and therefore I had to try certain pens, and I should have probably uh, you know took I should have taken a sheet of paper before I started and see how it reacts to the ink before I started doing this whole thing. So I would have probably spent less time trying to figure it out, but at least I am now a little bit wiser, and I think despite the fact that I was having a little bit of a rough start, or let's say bumpy start. Rough is definitely not the right word for it, but a little bit of a bumpy start. I think that the final result was definitely worth the amount of work, and I liked how it turned out. And as you can see, the drawing is slowly but surely coming to life, and unfortunately, I haven't um, you know listen to my own advice, which is to do the black spotting first and then add the details. This can sometimes happen, especially when you're a little bit, anxious, and with the camera floating over me, and such small figures on a piece of paper, I was having a little bit of second thoughts about some of my decisions, and that made it a little bit harder for me than usual, because I think with most of my drawings, the figures are usually a little bit bigger, or I will just, go for, you know, I won't go for full figures in the drawings, and therefore I was a little bit more anxious than I would usually be. But you grow with every new task, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, that it was definitely worth um, the time that I spent, because the drawing looks really nice and I liked where it was, or where it went. And that's the most important thing, because as I mentioned earlier in some of my other videos, sometimes it's not about the result, but sometimes it's about the process, and the process of learning. And believe it or not, no matter how long you're doing this, no matter how often you draw something, you grow with every drawing. And you start to realize that there are certain things that you can improve, and sometimes you will surprise yourself by being able to do things that you wouldn't expect yourself to be capable of. And that is a good thing. And I feel like um, that it shows in certain areas of this drawing. Since I've just finished the drawing and went to the video editing right away, this whole thing is still fresh in front of my eyes, and I don't know what to think, which is usually the case when I finish up a drawing, because the first, usually 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks after finishing a drawing, I will usually hate the drawing in some sort of way. But it definitely, it definitely grows on you. It always takes a little bit of time. For example, some of the drawings that I've done for, some of these other videos, when I look at them now, I am quite happy with them, and enjoy them even more than I did when I was illustrating them. And that shows you that sometimes when you've looked for too long at something, you won't be able to appreciate it with the necessary distance that you need in order to make a more objective or to give a more objective verdict on the drawing, because you want to make sure that your drawing um, that you look at your drawing with fresh eyes always. And then you're able to um, see it with different eyes, I think. Because um, it's it's like, if you think about it, if you look in the mirror and look at yourself, you will always see your quote unquote flaws. But for someone else, maybe those flaws will be what makes you beautiful, what makes you interesting to them. And and the same thing goes for art. When you're looking at your own stuff, especially your own drawings, for too long, you may end up having or find it difficult to like your stuff. But if you finish the drawing and then just put it aside for a few weeks or a few days or whatever, and then after that go back to it and look at it again, you may end up finding it more to your liking than you did in the beginning. Or maybe you will find all the flaws that you didn't see in the beginning, which may be the case as well. But the important thing is that you have to be able to distance yourself from the drawing for a bit, and allow yourself to you know not just allow yourself, but give yourself some slack. And think for yourself that, or think to yourself that it is what it is at this moment, but I can become better, and that's the most important thing. That's what you always want. And as you can see, I am still, despite the fact that I'm already inking the drawing, I'm still, sometimes sketching in something with the pencil. Um, that's the kind of the interesting part about these videos, because usually when I will do like a cover or pages, I will make sure that the underlying drawing is so tight that I don't have to change anything when I'm inking it. But with these drawings, I am usually just trying to find the right shapes and the right shading, and then it's usually off to the inks. But here it is basically just trying to figure out the pose and see if the anatomy is correct and the shading is alright, and that the figures don't look kind of wonky or something like that, and then I will go and start inking it. And ironically, that's usually an approach that everyone likes when they see the drawings, because they find that these drawings look a little bit more dynamic than my more finished and elaborate art. But finding the right approach for something is always a little bit tough. But we grow with every drawing, and sometimes we make the same mistake over and over and over and over again, and at some point we will be smart enough to not do it anymore. And I hope that I will get to that point where I am doing or making less mistakes and have less faulty lines and make less faulty decisions, which is also important, because drawing is also a lot about decisions. Sometimes you're being bold and try stuff that you usually wouldn't, and sometimes you just go with the safe kind of route and try to do the stuff that you've been doing for a long time. And now I am adding some black to Deadpool, and all these brush pens that I am usually using seem to be dried out for this drawing, and I had to find one that was working in my favor, and this one definitely did. And I am basically just adding these blacks to give Deadpool, or to flesh him out a little bit more, because I didn't want to go with heavy shading on him, since he has that much black already on his costume, and you don't want to irritate the eye with even more shading, especially when it's such a small figure as this one. And I'm very glad that I drew Deadpool in the size that I did, because this makes for more interesting drawing. Because if you compare Juggernaut now to Deadpool, you see that he's at least 3 times as wide as Deadpool, and at least 2 times as tall as him, and his arm is thicker than Deadpool's torso, which obviously wouldn't be the case in reality. Nobody's that big or nobody's that small, but in this drawing, it's more about the idea behind the characters, because Deadpool is supposed to be someone, very athletic and kind of a slim guy. You would say someone who's like into parkour or something like that, and Juggernaut is basically, a mixture of Brock Lesnar and the guy from Game of Thrones who plays the Mountain, and he's supposed to be a giant, and he's this force of nature, and that's what I'm trying to communicate with this drawing, because as I mentioned before, there's no one that tall, and there's no one that thick and wide and all that stuff. But in order to convey the idea of him being this powerful and this strong, I made him this large, and also made Deadpool so much smaller than him. And I think that that's kind of an interesting idea, and also gives the whole thing a little bit more of an interesting composition. And and I am now adding blacks and textures to the rocks and all that stuff that is flying around, because right now it doesn't make much sense that these rocks are flying around. But I think once I'm starting with the next thing here, which is going to be adding speed lines, everything will make more sense. I could have probably gone and just added a city into the background, or a silhouette of a city or something else, but for some reason in this drawing I thought that speed lines would make a lot of sense, because these speed lines will add a little bit more of energy to the drawing, and they will also give Juggernaut's movement a little bit more power and energy. And he's, like I said earlier, he's supposed to be this kind of force of nature. When he starts running, nobody can stop him. And I think, I don't remember very well, but I think from the comics that he was Charles Xavier's brother, and nobody can, even Charles Xavier can't control him because of the helmet. And once he gets started with running, nobody's able to stop him. And to have Deadpool jumping at him and making him basically stop is definitely an interesting idea. And and I think it's coming along nicely. I'm quite happy with the drawing, and I hope that you guys are enjoying this as much as I have been, and that you were also able to learn a little bit from what I was doing here, especially in terms of like decision making, because who would have thought that you could draw a character that much bigger than the other character and it still makes sense in order to convey an idea? Because I usually get a lot of comments like that my artwork looks very classic and all that stuff, and I think by using these shapes and these sizes I have stepped out of that kind of comfort zone, or that that labeling that I have received, but I'll leave the decision up to you. I hope you guys had a really good time here, and also that you were able to learn something about drawing, or whatever I am doing here. And if you guys want to see more of my videos, obviously it would be very cool if you would follow me on or subscribe to my YouTube channel, and like, comment, and share my videos. And also you can follow me on Instagram, which is @sedatözgen. And if you want to follow me on Facebook, it's @sedatözgenart. And and now I'm adding the final touches to the drawing with a little bit of whiteout, and using my whiteout pen as well. And and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you were able to take away something from this, and as you can see, it now looks much more dynamic, especially by adding these things that are flying around, like I don't know, a little bit of crap and stuff. And now I'm adding a little bit of outline to Deadpool, and that's it. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week. Bye bye.